I would like for us to look at a comprehensive problem at the end of your text, problem 23-26A. It asks us to prepare a flexible budget and the standard cost variances related to this particular budget. So let's take a look at Kyler Recliners, and they have provided for us their static budget. So these were the numbers that they had budgeted. So I would like for you to realize here that it's somewhat interchangeable. We're calling this the static budget. The static budget is where our standards come from. Okay, so when we're talking about our budgeted amounts, where did they come from? Our static budget. So that's what we see. We had a budget that was estimated for the sale of 1,025 recliners, but we actually sold 1,005 recliners, 20 less than we had anticipated. So as we mentioned, there is a static budget variance. That is the difference between my static and what I should have spent on 1,005 recliners. But what I would like to know is a comparison of my actual 1,005 recliners compared to what a flexible budget for 1,005 recliners should be. Okay, so if we'll move over to the second page, I'm going to leave these both open so that you can see the numbers from each page right now. In order to prepare the flexible budget for 1,005 units, all right, we need to come up with a cost per unit for our cost and sales revenue per unit. So how do we do that? Well, if I had estimated that I was going to generate sales of $507,375 for 1,025 recliners, that's $495 each. Okay, and so and they told us. We didn't even have to calculate it. They told us our sales are $495 per recliner. So $495 times 1,005 gives us our new flexible budgeted sales amount. Now we have to calculate. These aren't given to us quite as easily. We have to calculate the budgeted amounts per unit for material, labor, and overhead. But if I had estimated $54,735 divided by 1,025 recliners, that gives me $53.40 per recliner. The same thing, the $92,250 divided by 1,025 recliners, that gives me $90 per recliner in labor. Variable overhead the same way, $31,365 divided by 1,025 recliners. We had estimated $30.60 per recliner. So our estimated amounts per unit are coming from our static or our master budget. These are where our standards came from. And now I can simply extend these. $53.40 per 1,005 chairs, $53,667. $90 per 1,005 chairs, $90,450 in labor. $30.60 in overhead times 1,005 chairs is $30,753. And then notice our fixed costs do not change. They were 62. We estimated 62,730. It doesn't matter. Even though our actual results were different, okay, our budgeted amount for fixed overhead is the same regardless of whether we manufacture 1,025 or 1,005. Okay, and so you can see this is very simple. All I want to do is be able to compare what I should have spent on 1,005 recliners with what I did spend on 1,005 recliners. Okay, so once we have that information, it also asks us, we can, at this point, we could calculate some variances. We can see the difference in our sales. I can see that I spent $54,810 on materials when I should have spent $53,667. I spent $89,635 when I should have spent $90. I spent $40 when I should have spent $30. So we can see the broad skeletal framework of what our variances are going to be, but requirement 2 asks us to actually calculate them. Materials cost variance, materials efficiency variance. Let's look at these two first. And remember, cost, we're simply talking about, did I spend more or less for my material on these recliners than I thought? And we actually spent, it shows us, the top line is our standard, the bottom line is our actual. So it shows me that I actually spent $870 per yard when I thought I should spend $890. So I actually spent 20 cents less per yard than I thought. Automatically, that's a favorable variance. Multiply that times the actual number of yards that you purchased. Okay, that times our savings is our favorable variance. And we see where we purchased 6,300 yards here. So I have a favorable cost variance because I bought some cheaper materials. What does that do to efficiency? In our efficiency variance, I'm looking at quantity, not cost. And so I actually use 63,000 yards of material, we see here, versus 6,030 yards. Okay, well, wait a minute, this changed. I estimated 6,150. Why is my estimate or my standard here 6,030? This goes back to our flexible budget. I estimated 6,150 yards when I was going to manufacture 1,025 recliners. So I don't want to compare the 6,150 yards necessary for 1,025 recliners. I don't want to necessarily compare that with what I actually spent or actually purchased for 1,005 recliners. Right, so my actual quantity, I purchased 63,000 yards for 1,005 chairs. What should I have purchased? And you can see our calculation here. We have estimated that, let me come down to the calculation so you can see it here. We'll skim back up. We had estimated it would take 6,150 yards for 1,025 recliners. That's 6 yards per recliner. And how many recliners did we actually produce? 1,005. So I should have used my budget for 1,005 recliners is 6,030 yards, and that's what we see here. So I purchased 6,300 yards when I should have only used 6,030 yards for 1,005 recliners. This is unfavorable. So similar to the examples that we have seen before, did purchasing cheaper material cause me to use more material? And but we need to look at the additional variances that we have to see if we can pull some answers and some responsibilities together here. Let's take a look at the direct labor cost variance, and then we'll look at the direct labor efficiency variance. Okay, so in the cost variance, I'm concerned about, let me highlight this back here again. In my cost variance, I'm concerned about, did I spend more or less per direct labor hour than I thought I should? So let me slide back up a little bit here. All right, notice our direct labor. We thought we were going to pay $9 an hour. I actually paid $9.10. So actual of $9.10 less what I thought. I paid 10 cents per hour more than I thought I should. And I actually incurred 9,850 hours. So it cost me an extra $985 for paying people 10 cents more per hour than I had estimated we would pay. Let's bring that down to our efficiency variance. On our efficiency variance, we're comparing how many hours, actual hours, did we work. See if I can pull that up here and get both of them on the screen. We actually worked 9,850 hours. And we're comparing that to 10,050, but if you'll notice, this 10,050 doesn't quite line up with the 10,250 we have in our estimate. Remember, the 10,250 is for 1,025 recliners. What I want to know is how many direct labor hours should I have used for 1,005 recliners. And so we can see this calculation below. All right, we thought it should take 10,250 hours for 1,025 recliners, so we were estimating 10 hours per recliner. And how many did we manufacture? 1,005. So we estimated that it should take 10,050 hours of direct labor to manufacture these chairs. So we actually used less hours than we thought. That's a favorable variance. All right, so if we can kind of skim back up so that we can see all of these, I spent 20 cents less per yard on my material, but I used more material than I thought I should have. And in my labor, I paid my people 10 cents more per hour than I thought, but they worked less hours than we had anticipated. All right, so the final requirement is going to ask us to come up with an analysis of some of this, and I will post this response over here so you can see some of these. But before we look at those responses, I know I told you I would not hold you responsible for calculating overhead variances, but I do want you to see what they were. Okay, our variable overhead, once again, cost variance is simply we were looking at what was our actual cost. So what did we estimate to be our overhead rate, and it was $6.50 per yard versus the $5.10. We incurred $6.50 when it should have been $5.10. And so we actually have an unfavorable variance. Efficiency-wise, we had estimated that we should use 6,030 yards when we actually used 6,300. So we have two unfavorable variances in variable overhead. And so this is where we have to determine, with two unfavorable variances in cost and efficiency for variable overhead, is this within the parameters that we're comfortable with, or do we need to go back and reassess our overhead application rate to see if it is accurate for the processes that we are incurring? And then finally, the fixed overhead, once again, understand there's a difference between actual, budgeted, and allocated. So we actually spent $64,730 when we budgeted for $62. And this is, we could have purchased we could have incurred additional depreciation. We could have, spent additional. We could have run some overtime that we didn't anticipate, running. So the fixed overhead, even though it's an estimate, could change, but it should not change significantly. And then the volume variance part of this is simply a difference in the fact that I was budgeting fixed overhead for 1,025 recliners when I only manufactured 1,005. So my overhead allocation rates would have been too low. And so I would not have been putting enough out there in the end, which would make it unfavorable. We'll have to go and add that in the future because we only produced 1,005 recliners. Volume is the only thing that impacts this. So at this point, we would want to do some analysis to see, what is taking place. And we do have the favorable cost variance. So we did get cheaper materials. We just want to be sure that the quality stayed within our standards. Now, the unfavorable efficiency variance simply, indicates that we used more materials than we thought we should have. Why did that happen? Okay, so is our machine cutting the materials wrong? Are we stretching and gluing it wrong? What happened to cause us to use more than we thought we were going to? We also had the unfavorable direct labor cost variance, because we were paying more than what we thought. But is that something we could truly control? Is it an increase in salary, an increase in benefits, a shift in our workforce? And then finally, our efficiency variance was favorable. So apparently, we used less hours than we thought. That's a good thing. And so it might be the fact that we need to consider hiring someone that is a little more expensive, 10 cents more per hour, that has more experience. These are all things we need to take into consideration. Okay, like I said, I will post these solutions for you so that you can review all of the other analyses that we might follow through with on this particular problem. But just to realize, that a standard costing system is generated as a result. If we're generating the standard cost, we're estimating the materials, the labor, the overhead. We use those items to prepare our master budget, and then we can also create a flexible budget when our manufacturing, when our sales and production doesn't match what we actually budgeted. We can create a flexible budget so that we can truly compare what we did spend with what we should have spent on that production and sales level. We've got our performance standards, so we know when we need to make analyses up here of our variance to see if something's out of line. It helps me to determine the cost of our products on the front end, so I can help establish, the price of those products. And once again, if we have an efficient accounting information system, it could decrease our particular accounting cost. Okay, so this is a comprehensive problem that shows you a little bit of everything that we have learned in this chapter. Let me encourage you to go back and review this problem, and just to be sure that you understand why we are using the difference in cost per yard versus the amount of yards and the cost and efficiency. Why are we using cost of direct labor versus the amount of direct labor hours? And how are each of these variances interpreted, regardless of whether they are favorable or unfavorable? Because once again, these are decisions that you as managers may someday have to make, and you need to understand where the calculations came from in order to successfully analyze them.